A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
You know, there is this very specific, very heavy brand of parental guilt that only seems to hit when you are hunched over a laptop, trying to fire off an urgent email, while a small human is sitting on a playmat 3 feet away, just staring intensely at a plastic ring. You start looking at them out of the corner of your eye, and the internal monologue starts. Am I failing? Is their brain literally starving for stimulation because I am not currently performing a 3-act puppet show? Am I raising a child who will be behind because I needed 20 minutes of silence to finish a spreadsheet?
It is the modern parent's burden, corn, and today's prompt from Daniel really brings that into sharp focus. He's navigating the reality of working from home with 8.5-month-old Ezra, and the core of his worry is boredom. He is asking if they are doing enough, if there is a minimum number of trips outside required to keep a baby's brain from stalling, and how to read the signs of a child who is genuinely understimulated.
And we have to acknowledge the context here. It is March 16th, 2026, and Daniel mentioned that their childcare plans were thrown for a loop because of the war. That adds a layer of stress that is hard to even quantify. When the world outside feels chaotic or unsafe, the pressure to make the world inside perfect for your child becomes almost overwhelming. You feel like you have to compensate for the lack of a normal routine by being a one-man developmental center.
Herman Poppleberry here, and corn, you hit on something so fundamental right out of the gate. We have this chronic tendency to project our adult psychology and our adult neuroses onto infants. To an adult, sitting in the same room for 4 hours staring at a wooden spoon sounds like a slow descent into madness. We crave novelty, we crave digital input, we crave social interaction. But to an 8.5-month-old, that wooden spoon is not a boring kitchen utensil. It is a multi-dimensional physics laboratory. It has weight, it has a specific grain, it makes a distinct sound when it hits the floor, and it tastes different than the plastic ring. We need to dismantle this idea of infant boredom because, from a neurological perspective, what we call boredom is often just a necessary, high-intensity period of sensory integration.
I love that framing, Herman, but let's be real for a second. When a baby starts fussing or looking listless, a parent's first instinct is to entertain. We become these frantic cruise ship directors trying to keep the guest happy so they don't leave a bad review. Is there a point where that constant entertainment actually becomes counterproductive to their development?
It absolutely can be. When we talk about the 8.5-month mark, we are looking at a very specific and very volatile developmental window. If you remember back to episode 1205, we talked about the 9-month growth spike, which I like to call the system update for the brain. At 8.5 months, Ezra is standing right on the doorstep of that. His brain is undergoing massive synaptic pruning and neural mapping. He is moving from being a passive observer of the world to an intentional actor. He isn't just seeing a ball anymore, he is realizing for the first time that he is the one who can make the ball move. That shift from the world happens to me to I happen to the world requires an incredible amount of internal processing power.
So, when Daniel is worried that Ezra might be bored because they are stuck inside more than they planned, what is actually happening in Ezra's head? Is he sitting there thinking, man, I really wish we were at the park looking at those pigeons again?
Not in the way we think. Research suggests that infants spend roughly 70% of their waking hours in what researchers call passive observation mode. Now, passive is a bit of a misnomer. This isn't empty time. This is the time when they are building their internal models of how the physical world works. They are coding gravity. They are coding the way light and shadow move across the rug as the sun shifts. They are coding the way sound bounces off the walls in a quiet room versus a loud one. When a parent sees a baby staring into space and thinks they are bored, the baby is often actually doing the heavy lifting of cognitive development. They are observing the mundane details that our adult brains have long since filtered out as noise. To Ezra, there is no such thing as noise yet. Everything is data.
That is a massive relief for anyone working from home, but we have to be careful here. How do you tell the difference between a baby who is deep in thought, doing that heavy lifting you mentioned, and a baby who actually needs more input? There have to be signals, right? It can't just be a free pass to leave them in a corner with a sock all day while you take Zoom calls.
You're right, it's not a vacuum. There are very specific input and output signals to watch for. Understimulation usually looks like a slow, grinding slide into irritability. It is a whiny, persistent fussiness that doesn't have a clear physical cause like hunger, a dirty diaper, or teething. The baby might start seeking out sensory input in repetitive, almost frantic ways, banging their head against a cushion, rubbing their ears constantly, or making a repetitive vocalization. But here is the kicker, corn. Overstimulation often looks almost identical to the untrained eye. If a parent is constantly hovering, showing them a new toy every 5 minutes, or keeping the television on in the background while they work to keep the baby busy, the baby's brain can hit a saturation point. They shut down or get cranky because they simply cannot process the sheer volume of data coming in. Their buffer is full and they start glitching.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act. You don't want a sensory vacuum, but you don't want a sensory fire hose either. You mentioned earlier that a messy living room might actually be better for a baby than a perfectly curated, sterile nursery. Why is that? It feels counterintuitive.
Think about the complexity of the environment. A high-tech educational toy is usually a closed loop. It is designed to do one or two things. It flashes a light, it plays a pre-recorded song. Once the baby figures out that button A leads to sound B, the cognitive work is mostly finished. It becomes a rote activity. Now, compare that to a messy living room. You have different textures. The rough carpet, the smooth hardwood, a stray cotton sock, a crinkly piece of mail, a heavy cardboard box. You have different weights and temperatures. A metal spoon feels cold and heavy. A plastic one feels warm and light. The light changes throughout the day. This is what we call a high-fidelity environment. A baby exploring a pile of safe household objects is engaging in much deeper problem-solving and sensory integration than a baby playing with a toy that has a pre-programmed outcome. The mess is actually a rich data set.
I love the idea of the cardboard box being the ultimate developmental tool. It's a classic for a reason. But let's talk about the object permanence aspect. At 8.5 months, Ezra is likely right in the thick of realizing that things still exist even when he can't see them. How does that play into this boredom anxiety Daniel is feeling?
It makes everything more exhausting for the baby, which parents often mistake for boredom or unhappiness. Every time Daniel walks out of the room to take a call or grab a coffee, Ezra is potentially running a mental simulation of where he went. He is testing the hypothesis. Does Dad still exist if I can't see his face? This is where the serve and return model becomes so vital for working parents. You don't need to be a full-time entertainer. Even if you are busy working, those micro-engagements, a quick smile when you look up from the screen, a comment from across the room like, I see you playing with that box, Ezra, a 2-second game of peekaboo over the laptop lid, these are massive for a baby. They reinforce the idea of social permanence. It doesn't require a 45-minute dedicated play session to satisfy that need for connection. It is about the frequency and the quality of those tiny, consistent interactions.
That is a huge takeaway. You don't need to be a clown, you just need to be a consistent presence. But Daniel also asked about the outside world. Is there a set quota for trips out of the house? Because when you are in a high-stress environment or a conflict zone like they are, getting out isn't always easy or even safe. Does a baby suffer if they don't get that daily park visit?
The short answer is a resounding no. There is no biological requirement for a specific number of trips to the park. The outside world is great because it provides a different set of sensory inputs, the feeling of wind, the sound of distant traffic, the smell of rain. But those inputs aren't unique to the park. You can get a lot of that just by opening a window, sitting on a balcony, or even just changing which room the baby is playing in. The outside fallacy is the idea that the home environment is somehow insufficient for development. In reality, for an 8-month-old, your living room is a vast, unexplored continent. If you move the coffee table or put a safe mirror on the floor, you have essentially created a brand new world for them to explore. The novelty comes from the arrangement of the environment, not necessarily the GPS coordinates.
So the stress of not being able to do the normal childcare routine shouldn't be compounded by the fear that Ezra is falling behind. That is an important distinction. But what about the parental stress itself? If Daniel and Hannah are on edge because of the war or the pressure of working with a baby in the house, does that trickle down to Ezra? Does that affect his boredom or his development?
It does, and that is actually a much bigger factor than the number of toys he has. Infants are incredibly sensitive to the physiological markers of stress in their caregivers. They are like little barometers for cortisol. They pick up on the tension in how they are held, the tone of voice, even the rhythm of a parent's breathing. If the parent is driving themselves crazy trying to create a perfect, boredom-free environment while they are secretly panicking about work or safety, the baby is going to feel that tension. A calm, present parent in a small, quiet room is infinitely better for a baby's brain than a stressed out, frantic parent in a world-class science museum. Your emotional regulation is the primary environment your child lives in.
That brings us to the practical side of this. If Daniel and Hannah are managing as best as they can, how do they set up a system that allows them to work while Ezra stays occupied and happy? You mentioned a floor time protocol earlier. What does that look like in a real world, working from home setup?
It is all about the rotating sensory station. Instead of putting all the toys out at once, which just leads to sensory overwhelm and that glitching I mentioned, you pick 3 or 4 items. Maybe a silicone whisk, a crinkly piece of parchment paper, and a softball. You put them in a safe, enclosed area on the floor near where you are working. The key, and this is the hardest part for parents, is to let the baby lead. If Ezra is staring at the whisk for 15 minutes, let him. Don't interrupt to show him the ball because you think he's done with the whisk. That interruption actually breaks his concentration and prevents him from developing the ability to focus deeply. We often accidentally train babies to have short attention spans by constantly helping them play.
It's almost like we have to train ourselves to stay out of the way. We think we are being good parents by being active, but we are actually disrupting their deep work.
When he finally finishes with an object, he drops it, looks away, or starts to fuss. That is when you swap one item out. It keeps the environment novel without being overwhelming. For the working parent, it means you only have to intervene every 15 or 20 minutes rather than every 2. You are facilitating his independence, which is a huge milestone at this age. You are the lab assistant, not the lead scientist.
I think we also need to address the screen time temptation. When you are on a deadline, your boss is messaging you, and the baby is starting to ramp up the fussing. The phone or the television feels like a total lifeline. We did a whole deep dive on this in episode 515, but specifically for an 8-month-old like Ezra, why is that a trap when it comes to boredom?
Because it is passive stimulation of the worst kind. It is the polar opposite of what Ezra's brain needs right now. At 8.5 months, he needs to learn that his actions have consequences in the physical world. If he drops a block, it makes a specific sound. If he pushes his body forward, he moves closer to the toy. A screen provides intense visual and auditory input that requires zero interaction. It can actually make them more bored in the long run because it raises the threshold for what they find interesting. Real life starts to feel slow and dull compared to the hyper-stimulated frame rate heavy world of a cartoon. It is much better to let them be a little bit frustrated with a physical object, which forces them to problem solve, than to soothe them with a screen that turns off their brain's active engagement.
That frustration is actually where the learning happens, isn't it? If they can't quite reach a toy and they have to figure out how to pivot their body or scoot forward, that is a huge win for their motor development. It's not a failure of the parent to let them struggle a little.
It is the engine of growth. If we solve every problem for them immediately because we are afraid they are bored or unhappy, we are robbing them of the chance to build those neural pathways for persistence. An 8-month-old who is struggling to reach a ball is a baby who is learning about spatial awareness, muscle control, and the very concept of a goal.
Let's talk about the 15-minute rule you mentioned in the plan. How does that work for a parent who is juggling 1,000 things and feeling like they are failing at all of them?
The 15-minute rule is a mental framework designed to lower the pressure. Instead of feeling like you need to be on and engaged for 8 hours a day, commit to 15 minutes of high-quality, totally undistracted interaction 3 or 4 times a day. During those 15 minutes, the phone is in another room, the laptop is closed, and you are entirely focused on Ezra. You follow his lead. If he picks up a leaf that blew in from the window, you talk about the leaf. You name the colors, the textures, you describe what he is doing. This high-intensity connection fills their cup, so to speak. It satisfies their need for social connection so deeply that they are much more likely to play independently for longer stretches afterward. It's about the quality of the serve and return, not the quantity of the hours spent on the floor.
It's the quality over quantity argument again. I think that is a very empowering message for parents who are feeling stretched thin, especially in a crisis. You don't have to be perfect for 8 hours. You just have to be present for 60 minutes spread throughout the day.
And you can use your environment to your advantage. Do a resource audit of your house. What do you already have that is safe for an 8-month-old to explore? A muffin tin with some large, safe objects like a tennis ball, a clean sponge, and a large measuring spoon placed in the cups is a fantastic sensory puzzle. A plastic container filled with just an inch of water, with close supervision of course, is a whole afternoon of physics lessons. You don't need a subscription box or a trip to a specialized play center. Your kitchen is a goldmine of cognitive development tools.
I'm imagining Ezra with a muffin tin now, and honestly, that sounds more engaging than most of the plastic educational toys I've seen. It's about seeing the world through their eyes again. Everything is new. Everything is a mystery waiting to be solved.
That perspective shift is the best cure for parental boredom anxiety. If you can stop seeing the living room as a place where you are trapped and start seeing it as Ezra's laboratory, the pressure to go outside or find new entertainment starts to evaporate. He is doing exactly what he needs to be doing, observing, testing, and building a world.
We should probably touch on the future-proofing aspect of this. Daniel and Hannah looking at these days is a bit of a holding pattern, but what is actually being built right now? How does this 8.5-month phase set the stage for those big 12-month milestones we all look forward to?
This is the foundation for language and social cognition. Around this time, babies start developing what we call joint attention. That is the ability to look at something because you are looking at it. When Daniel points at a bird outside the window, or even just a crumb on the floor, and Ezra looks, they are engaging in a shared mental state. This is the precursor to understanding that other people have thoughts, intentions, and perspectives. It is also the bedrock of language. You can't learn the word for apple until you can both focus on the apple at the same time. So, even if they are just sitting on the floor together while Daniel takes a 5-minute break, that shared focus is doing massive developmental work. It's not wasted time.
So the message to Daniel, Hannah, and to anyone in a similar spot is, you are doing enough. The fact that you are even worried about his boredom is proof that you are providing the kind of attentive, responsive environment he needs to thrive.
Precisely. The goal isn't to eliminate every moment of quiet or every moment of frustration. The goal is to provide a safe, consistent base from which he can explore. Whether that exploration happens in a park or on a rug in the living room, the neurological result is the same. He is growing, he is learning, and most importantly, he is deeply connected to his people. That is the most important part of the system update.
I think that is a great place to wrap the core of this. It's a stressful time, but Ezra is in good hands. Before we head out, let's hit some of the big takeaways for people to keep in their back pocket. First, shift from being an entertainer to being an observer. Let the baby lead the play and try not to interrupt their focus, even if they're just staring at a shadow. Second, remember the 15-minute rule. Quality beats quantity every time. Give them your full self for short bursts. And third, do that resource audit. Your house is full of better toys than anything you can buy in a store.
And don't forget that your own well-being is a developmental factor. Taking care of yourself and managing your own stress is one of the best things you can do for your child's cognitive environment. If you need to take a breath or step away for a minute to regulate yourself, do it. A calm parent is the best toy in the room.
If you want to dive deeper into the science of this specific age group, definitely check out episode 498, where we really broke down why that 7 to 8 month window feels so much like a boredom trap when it actually isn't. And for more on the neurological shifts coming up for Ezra, episode 1205 is the one you want.
It's a fascinating journey. Every time I read these papers, I am just floored by how much work is happening under the surface of a baby who looks like they are just chewing on a shoe.
It's a high-performance machine in a very cute package. Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping the gears turning behind the scenes. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show and allow us to dive into these topics every week.
We really appreciate the support. It makes a huge difference in what we can bring to you all.
This has been my Weird Prompts. If you are enjoying the show, a quick review on your podcast app really helps us reach new listeners and keeps the conversation going. We will be back soon with more of your prompts and more deep dives into the weird and wonderful ways our world works.
Take care of yourselves out there.
See you next time.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my weird prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the flows from slow